Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Eric, joined by Jack, as always.
Hey, I'm here. I'm available. I'm on the podcast, Eric.
Thank you so much. I know it was really tough for you to clear your very busy schedule to be on this weekly podcast we film once a week. Thank you. So thank you very much for that.
I had to talk to a few people to get it on the books, but, you know, we managed.
Your child and your wife?
Yes, that's probably it.
Well, hello. How are you doing today, Jack?
I'm good. I'm eager to talk about board games. This is a topic that I care very much about, it
better be. You started a whole YouTube channel based on it, so I really hope you care about board games. Yes, yeah.
Well, specifically, we've been talking about topics. We've been talking about topics in general, and for those who don't know, Eric has been taking over a lot of the podcasty aspect of the Cardboard Herald recently, and I was like, what's our topic today? And he shot back to me, components, and I was like, hell yeah.
I think that every board game has, I feel like every board game has a component that at least at minimum can be commented upon as either a really good component or a bad component. I feel like most games have something that you can point to and be like, oh, this is a really solid component for what it's trying to be, or why did they design this thing in this way?
Totally.
And I just thought it was like kind of a fun topic, just because a lot of thought and design goes into them. And they're a weird little thing about our hobby that it's just a fun thing that I think sets board games apart from a lot of other types of media, is that there are physical things that you're interacting with, and the design matters. But first off, what have you been playing this week, Jack?
I've been playing a bunch of stuff. I mean, we've been hitting some oldies but goodies. We played some Five Tribes last night. Christina and I got that to the table after a game of Harmonies, and it was great. We were commenting on how it kind of feels like of a time now. We have enough distance from Five Tribes, whether it's the place and time that we were when we got it, or it was just the games that were coming out around the time that it came out. It definitely feels of about 10 years ago, fitting in with the Lords of the Waterdeeps, the Kingdom Builders, that kind of stuff. As far as new stuff, I haven't played too much new stuff. I played Word Traveler, which is kind of an interesting cooperative word game that has some like logistic pathing based off of observational word association. It's Office Dog's first game. It does not hold up to where I think they go with River of Gold and the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game. But it's cool.
That is the trajectory you hope a board game studio takes, is better and better games keep coming out, as opposed to, it'd be really sad if Word Traveler was like, this is like the thing they put the highest effort in. I've never played it, so I might love it. I do love word games.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because it's something that feels like it would fit really well in like a mass market context, or like bring home to the family type of thing. It's fully cooperative, low pressure. It kind of, I don't know if you remember from childhood those like quiz games or like trivia cards that were like long tarot card looking things on a single loop. It has that aesthetic. Like the artwork looks born entirely out of that, with some intentionality. So like there is some craft involved in the game, and I like that. The other one that I was excited to at least touch on here, but maybe talk about a little bit later, for those of you who are listening, you are missing out on License to Krill, which is a board game where the box is the whale, and there are cards that come out of the plushie that is zippered on the front. It's bonkers as a concept. The game is very meh. So this is a game where the component is doing the heavy lifting. The component got it into the door. The component is why I'm commenting on it right now.
Look at that, though. That's adorable.
Yes,
Again, audio listeners, you are missing out on a very adorable board game packaging.
Right. And I don't know if we have like a announcement section or anything, but I guess we should mention this is up on like Apple Podcasts and stuff. And then we also figured out how to get it up on Spotify, too.
Yeah, it is now on Spotify, so it should be on pretty much any major podcast streaming format. You should be able to find and listen to this podcast. And I think that YouTube is the only place we're posting the video, just because that's the hosting site that we know best, and it's where the rest of our content is, so it just kind of makes sense to keep the video version of the podcast there. But yeah, feel free if you're just looking for the audio. I know that we just gave a glowing review to watch it, because you got to see a very cute whale.
Yes.
But if you are hoping for an audio version, we are now, I think, on all of the major platforms, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, we got to talk to Jay-Z and Kanye about whatever their platform was from a few years ago. But as far as
Tidal,
yes, there we go.
The very popular music stream that's still just as popular as ever.
Right. Yeah. Both of those figures are probably not those that we currently, as of right now in 2025, want to do a lot of heavy association with our brand.
I'm okay if we keep the Cardboard Herald separate from Kanye.
Yeah,
I don't.
That's a good plan. That's a good plan.
Heard anything about Jay-Z, but I think for sure Kanye. I feel pretty confident in saying that we can avoid business associations with him.
Yeah, well, I mean, as his I guess, stature goes down, maybe we could get him as a guest at some point. If nothing else, that'd be kind of crazy. Yeah,
that could be fun. Do you think Kanye's a big board gamer? What do you think his favorite board game is?
I think he'd tell us he's a big board gamer.
You got me there.
Yep. What have you been playing, Eric?
I've been playing Ark Nova on Board Game Arena. I've been trying out the Marine World expansion. I own the physical copy, but this is a game that I feel like benefits a lot from being digital, just for the sake of it is so easy to just press go, whereas I feel like with the physical version, it does take a little bit. And if you're playing solo, I can see Board Game Arena being like the spot to do it.
Are you doing solo or are you doing multiplayer on BG?
Both. A little bit of both. I've done both. I've been trying out just because I think that's the thing that I would like to do a review on at some point, the Marine World expansion. Because that is actually one of the first videos I said I would do for this channel.
Yes.
So I would like to follow
that would be a good idea
at some point or another.
It's been on the Google Sheets for quite a while.
Yeah. There are a couple things that are on there that like I fully need to do at some point or another. Imperium Horizons is another one. I get it. One.
Empires Rise and Fall, man. But how are you feeling about the expansion?
It's pretty fun. I think that it opens up a lot of pathways to pursue weirder strategies. So like today in a solo game, I was like able to get a really nice predator icon loop, which I just feel like I was able to do because you now in the expansion there's an option to purchase like any animal tag. Right. So like I can purchase a science icon and a predator tag, which let me play, like just helps you play predators more easily because they usually need you to have either predators in play already, and they also benefit from having that already there. But there were a couple others where it was like, oh, I need a primate icon to play this animal that I want to play.
Are you playing with just the standard solo mode? I know that when I first got Ark Nova, I was still really hot for a lot of solo modes. I made sure any game that I review, more or less, any game that I review, I try to hit the solo mode if there is one. But when I got that game, I loved the multiplayer and I loved the solo mode. And I was surprised that after my review, because I tried to distance myself from reactions before I really get in the midst of a game. Like, I might pay attention to buzz, but as far as nuanced reaction and analysis, I try to divorce myself from that. And I was surprised that there are a lot of people who criticized the solo mode of the game as feeling empty or too pressured or truncated, like it was too fast of a version of the game to really mirror the experience of playing multiplayer. I can kind of understand that, but I really like the solo mode as is.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it. It is just the base solo mode. I mean, through Board Game Arena, that's what they have.
Yeah.
I can see that being the case just because there are a lot of times where I'm like, well, there's no churn in the card market because that's not really a factor in the game.
Right.
Like, it only happens every 7 turns. And if there's just like the first 5 cards in the thing are all cards that I don't want, and maybe there's a 6th card that I could get that I would want to get, but I can't get it because of snapping rules. So it's just like, well, these cards are all just going to stay exactly where they are, and I'm just going to drop from the deck. And then in 3 rounds after those cards have made their way down the aisle, then I can get this card that I actually want. So I can see it being that there's a little bit of frustration of it doesn't really mimic a multiplayer game in quite the same way. I feel like I can also see the comment that the pressure on it is really high just because it is like it starts feeling more like how few turns you have on like White Castle and Harvest, where it's like, oh, I do have to like I can't dilly dally, which you can kind of do in a multiplayer game a little bit easier at least.
You can vamp.
Yeah, I've been having a lovely time with this solo version. I mean, I think that as far as like how big of a game this feels like a really complete solo mode.
Right.
Like, I'm definitely getting most of the experience I would get out of a multiplayer game. Like, there are definitely things that I'm missing out on. Like the card churn and being like, oh, I really need to get that card before somebody else is able to. I don't know what that noise was. But that's I think that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make to be able to actually mostly get the rest of Arc Nova.
As a follow-up from last week, do you find that the like additive reef stuff to increase the card churn, the new universities, that kind of stuff, does it mitigate some of the, I guess, more luck-based elements of the original Arc Nova?
I think the universities definitely do. I keep trying to interact with the new content, and it just keeps being like so much out of the way for me to do that, in terms of like, I can't play the fish until I put the aquarium in play, but I can't put the aquarium in play until I upgrade my build action. And I understand that that's like a thing that is something you can do reasonably early, is upgrade a card, but to interact with like any of the new fish that are in the game, have to upgrade your build action makes it so that's a little bit.
Is that true? I'm so. Now like.
If it's not true, then I've been playing terribly wrong this whole time, which is possible.
Yeah, I think the aquarium can be built right off the bat with the base build action, because they specifically didn't want to make it so it was overly restrictive. So that opens up a brand new world for you, my man.
Oh, well, I'm going to have to give that a go then. Oh,
all
wow.
Right.
Really?
I could be wrong. I mean, let's the audience can bear out, but I think that we can, in fact. Ooh, you have it here.
I have it right here. Hold on.
You have it here.
You talk while I look at the rules.
Oh,
what
vamp.
else have you been playing?
Oh, vamp. Well, As far as playing or, getting around to, I talked about Kinfire Delve recently. I got more plays of that in. I'm working on the review for that and other projects going around here. Just completed the Harmonies review that we both worked on and should have that up. As far as some announcement type of stuff for the Cardboard Herald, we've been doing more shorts that we have been posting online. It was fun kind of experimenting with more short form comment or short form content that is on comment. And I also learned what the millennial pause was and the Gen Z shake as I consulted a friend on like, hey, what do you think about the short form content? And what do you think about my big breath at the beginning of the video? And she's like, that's just the millennial pause. I was like, what are you talking about? It's a whole thing. You can look it up.
Whole thing. I'll look
Generational
it up.
thing. I guess TikTok, YouTube Shorts, they've already established it. But anyway, shorts are available. We're working on those. Mm-hmm. We're also working on some giveaways. We're probably going to have an announcement soon about how patrons of a certain tier, which hopefully is a pretty low tier, are going to be automatically entered to win a game a month. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I found out I was horribly wrong. Yeah, you can build that immediately. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
From what I could tell. So that'll be fun. I guess I've just never, my assumption.
That's why you hadn't reviewed the game yet. You need this moment.
That's why I needed this moment. Right. Yeah, for some reason, I guess I just assumed that it needed that, but
well, all the other special buildings aside from the petting zoo require the upgraded build action, so makes sense. Makes sense. I get it.
So I've been playing Arc Nova, horribly wrong, but I have been playing that. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I've been playing that I've been getting onto the table is Sky Team, but with solo rules.
I've heard of this.
Interesting. And it seems from my looking over BGG and a couple other places, there's essentially 3 paths you can go down for the solo mode, which is either roll all of your partner's dice, and then you just have both dice publicly available to you.
Yeah.
Which makes it, I feel like that would make it too easy.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Roll 1 dice at a time, and just whatever you roll, you have to place that turn, no matter what the number is, but you can't plan at all for it, which I feel like does make it reasonably difficult. Like that's a good level of difficult, probably. Or what I did, which I think I preferred better just because of how much what I want out of this game, which is roll 2 dice, use 1, keep the other, and then just whenever it comes to the bot's turn, make sure you have 2 dice available until. So it's like you're gonna roll 2 dice, but now you know what 2 of the dice the opponent or your partner has is. So you have a 1 and a 5, and then you use the 5, and so you keep that 1, you roll another dice to replenish it, and that's worked pretty well.
Nice.
I think there was enough planning that I felt like I could do what I needed to do, to be like I gotta like really figure out how to best puzzle this out. But because of you don't know all that your partner's gonna roll, which I felt mimicked the base game pretty well. Pretty good. Just in terms of it's not an official solo variant. But to make this 2-player only co-op into a soloable mode, it was like really easy to implement that because there's not like any special rules or components you need. It's just how do you roll the dice, and I think that worked reasonably well from when I tried. I played for about 2 hours earlier and felt like I got a nice little experience out of it.
For anyone who hasn't really investigated this at all, I've mentioned this a couple times in various videos where I have lambasted a publisher for not having a solo mode, or I thought a solo mode was bad or whatever. the most impressive group of gamers that I know of is the BGG solo community. They will solo anything. You could give them a hamburger and they're like, we made a solo game out of it. There's just an unbelievable amount of design work that goes on beyond what is published by a company to iterate, develop, and flesh out solo modes, whether one existed or not. It's really fascinating. So chances are, if there's ever a game where you're like, I'd love to play this, I like solo, but this doesn't have a solo mode, go to BGG, look at variants. You're probably going to find one.
Yeah, I still haven't tried. I am a little bit baffled by how many different solo modes there are of arcs.
Yeah.
That's like a thing that I found where I'm like, this is just, I don't know which one to try. I got to try the one that Travis said to try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, there's like 4 or 5 different options, and they all seem reasonably complicated, but that makes sense with arcs. I feel like that there's not an easy solo mode option for that. Like I can understand why that was not included in the base game.
Totally. Well, it's probably time, huh? Probably time to talk about some pieces, some toys, some things.
Some toys, some components. Yeah, well, I just think that first we can start off with why board game components matter. That's a note that I think is a really important thing to explain why we might really like a component or why we might dislike a component. Mm-hmm. But this is like how, at least for me, that is how you are interacting with the world of the game, is through components. And while it might be like a deck of cards that you're playing, there's also like a lot of things that it matters that the component is shaped the exact way it's shaped. There's a reason why a component that is really high quality stands out as something that, if this is a thing that you're going to be interacting with a lot, that the publisher or developer has like put a lot of thought and effort into how this component fits the game, shows a lot of care that I think should be applauded in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, let me get this out of the way up front. I think when people really think about it, this is going to be true for most gamers. I'm certain that it's true for us. Like, good components can't save a bad game, though a mediocre or good game is almost always improved by having better components. Now, better is incredibly subjective, right? I think that's really a case-by-case basis on what a game is specifically going for. There's a lot of people who will talk online about, like, I never want to see miniatures again, or I never want to see this type of components again, or I hate beige boards or whatever. I'm an omni gamer. I like all sorts of things, and I want to see all sorts of different things. And it's hard for me to like specifically go like, this is something I always like in a game. But when I do see a component that that really speaks to me, it absolutely enriches the experience of playing the game. Now, what you're talking about with the way that you interact with the game, that you interact with the world of the game, I think of it as like an interface, right? Like you could have a crappy 480 TV and play video games on that, and it will run those. But you could also have, like a 4K monitor or something, and it makes everything else pop. It could be the same game, but there's definitely a tangible difference between those types of things. And then you can draw comparisons from like the visuals to usability. Like component usability is something that I think is getting more and more attention in the publishing side of things in the last like 5 or 6 years, with colorblind accessibility options, making sure that things are easily picked up and retrievable, slotted boards. are kind of like a maybe not an accessibility thing, but they're certainly something that can go beyond just making a production look nice, but actually having a physical, tangible difference that improves the quality of life in the game itself. So there's a lot of things that I think make components important, that provide function beyond just visuals. But the most intimate thing to me, certainly, starts with the visuals. It's the toy aspect of the game. It's the game on the table that invites me to want to interact with it. It's the thing that hooks me. It's going to be my first experience. And once I get to the table and I start interacting with it, then that's going to be the function. And that's where I'm caring much more about, like, what do these pieces facilitate? But the most gut emotional reaction is almost always visual, whether that's art assets throughout the game. That could be UI assets, or it could just be association. You know, like, this game evokes this other experience that I've had, and how cool is that other experience? So maybe these two games are very similar.
Yeah, and I think that there's something to be said that sometimes board game components can build a, like, unspoken language of, oh, whenever I see a component that looks like this, it generally is going to do this thing. Like, if I ever see a meeple, I know that that's going to represent my character somewhere on the board.
Right,
and I think that could be helpful getting people into the hobby. I also think that there's a lot of components that bring a lot of table presence in a way that is really strong. Like, I can't imagine Everdell without the tree, even though I think it's a super non-functional board. Like, there's no reason for the tree. Like, you could have the exact same game with it just being, like, some extra slots on the board.
Right.
And it would be totally fine.
Like, some woodland ziggurat, it stands in front of you, and you're like, whoa, what is this thing?
And it brings so much flair to the game that I don't think that it would have otherwise. In a similar way, like, I played We're Sinking recently. I have a review coming out for that at some point or another, and that has, like, a pirate ship component that is, like, an actual thing you have to interact with in the game, unless you're really good and kill the monster before you sink at all, which is highly unlikely.
Right.
If you do that, you don't have to interact with the pirate ship. But it's like a thing of, I like that as a board game component because it's something that both has table presence and, like, has a meaningful thing that happens in the game. The quality control on it is not very good because my pirate ship wiggles in a way that I don't like. But I think that there's a thing to be said of, sometimes board game components are table presence, and it just is like, this dominates the table and brings focus to it. There are a lot of games that I think have something similar to that. But then I think other times there are just components that it's really small, but it is such a good... It's a sign of care that they put time and effort into making this component very good. In Sky Team, the slotted double board, they didn't need to make it a slotted double board. They could have easily made it just one layer. It kind of would have sucked. There's, like, things about it that I think the game would be worse off if it wasn't, like, this assembly required board in the middle. But because it's there, it just shows so much care went into making that as good as possible. So I think that there are things like that where just the amount of care going into the piece shows that they've thought about you as the player playing this game.
Yeah, you know, like, I think that components go a long way in elevating the experience, the cute novelty. Sky Team has little switches, which are kind of fiddly switches, and I loved that in the expansion. They're like, and we have more switches in case you lost some of your switches. I'm like, okay, they're kind of acknowledging that the switches are kind of fiddly, but they are cute, and the double layered board is really nice. The way the radial for the tilt of the plane is rested in there works really well. The way the dice go in there, it feels like it elevates the experience and the theme of the game. That feels like, every kid's dream of being up at a cockpit dashboard and being able to hit the buttons and press the switches and interact with the things. Hopefully kids aren't dreaming about doing that as the plane is hurtling towards the ground. But
it's making a safe, reasonable landing, if I have anything to say about it.
Totally. And one of the things about Sky Team that makes it work really well in this context is that it is not exorbitantly expensive. It is a very good production for the level of game, the depth of game that they wanted to provide, and it kind of hits the right balance on all those regards. Whereas, you could have even nicer components that are twice as expensive, but that's not really that game. That's not what it's going for. You got to hit a nice equilibrium, like the tilt of the plane, to be able to land that just right. And I think that there are some, other ways that components can enhance the theme, and not just trying to portray the specific theme, but the resonance of the tone of the game. Pax Pamir is another great example of this, with the beautiful canvas rollout and then these totemic clay pieces that are the roads and soldiers that stand up. And the fact that they're pillars instead of shaped to look like individuals gives it kind of this more antiquity based. Antiquated. There we go.
There you are.
You know words. There we go.
Do.
Antiquated
I do great at
vibe to the game, which I think it's overall trying to evoke. And all of those things are what enhances the experience of a game. I truly believe that if someone's like, I don't care at all about the theme or the components, then they're to a degree lying, because if that were the case, you'd just be playing spreadsheets,
you there are reasons most people don't play print and plays.
Yeah.
Like I do, and I have a totally fine time with them, but I understand that it's print and play. Like the reason I'm getting this game for free is because we're not always free. I do sometimes pay for my print and plays depending on the avenue, but it's that the reason it's the price that it is because the components should have a level of care put into them that make them enjoyable to fiddle about with.
Well, even print and plays, that's another important aspect of components that I definitely want to get to, is design limitations, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes a game's design is restricted by the physicality of how you're interfacing with the game. And I imagine that publishers are all the time having to make practical decisions during development, past the initial signing or idea of the game, that impact some aspect of it because of the funding constraints to bring something to life. This was a really cool idea until we found out how much it was going to cost to print these. Yeah. So we had to go and do this other thing.
Yeah, and then some games really lean into the restriction. For an example, and this is a game that I think actually, from what I've been able to ascertain, actually does not have the best board game components. But Gloomhaven Bugs and Buttons is all about how much can we take away while keeping the Gloomhaven essence.
Right.
And from what I've seen, I haven't actually played it. I would like to. From your review and seeing the components in person, like the cards are not the best quality and they bend and warp in weird ways.
Yeah, that's not ideal. And my way around that is that you could have like a top loader, like a hard plastic top loader that you keep like a baseball card or a, a rare Magic or Pokemon card or something in. You could just put the current mission in that, and that flattens it out. That solves the problem, but a top loader doesn't fit in that box. But even that is a great idea of, how do I wrap this whole experience into as few and as small components as possible? And also, what is stretching the limit of functionality? Yeah. Not just the design essence, but those are really tiny pieces. Any tinier, and it would have been beyond any sort of reason. And I imagine that there are a non-insignificant amount of people who find it too small to play on. Like Buttons and Bugs is fabulous. I loved it. I listed it as one of my favorite games of the year. But if I were 20 years...
Check out that video now in the top right corner if I figure out how to do that.
Yes. But if I were 20 years older, which I hope I'm playing games in 20 years, that may, interact with my arthritis in a different way. That may interact with my visual capabilities in a different way.
Yeah.
One of my main Frosthaven buddies, like he has to put on reading classes. He's not that much older than me, but, like for certain things, he's like, all right, well, like let me look at this. And that's not to disparage him, but, that's with the proper size thing. Components matter. Accessibility matters, especially when what we're trying to do is to get people to the table. One thing that I've thought long and hard about, but I don't know that I've really talked to you about, is to what extent do you define components? Because there's the game board and the pieces you interact with, but are components everything that's in the box? Like I've long argued that the rule book should be treated with the same level of importance as any other component, thereby calling it a component. But, the rule book, is the box a component,
I think it can be. In my mind, when I think of components, I think of anything that's taken out of the box.
Okay.
I think the storage solution itself, like if there's like little dividers, I don't always think of those as a component unless like clearly care has been put into them.
But what if it facilitates ease of the game? So, for example, I am working on the Kinfire Delve review, and it comes in 3 sets of boxes that are kind of like the Katmai size of box, and it has 2 decks of cards that lay down flat on their backs. And it would be wonderful, especially because the game is kind of designed with the modularity of pairing them all together, if I could reasonably store them all in one box. I can't do that, and storing them in separate boxes is maddening, and it is something that I'm talking about in the review as one of the things that I dislike about this game that I otherwise like quite a bit. And in that regard, like the box, the storage solution itself, is making a poor experience for taking out the game and playing it.
Yeah, I think that it definitely can. I think it can be considered. I guess, yeah, maybe you're bringing me around on everything in the box, including the box itself, as being a component.
Am I a component? Eric, am I a component?
You're not in the box.
Okay, well...
And you're not a box. I mean, I get, unless you are counting all humans as components, and your skin is the box, then no.
Okay.
And that feels like a very not astute way of describing a person. The skin is the box.
Okay. So...
But something like, I don't know, like something... like Set a Watch, where the box is definitely a component, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Easy mark. But things like, I don't know. I mean, in my mind, Gloomhaven has terrible storage solution in the box. You need to go out and buy a different storage solution just to like make it easy to get into and out, like get onto the table.
Right.
And with that, like, is that a strike against the components of Gloomhaven? Because I think otherwise the miniatures are really interesting and do a decently good job. I think that the different tiles do a really reasonable job of showing all of the different environments you're doing battle in.
Right.
So I guess I don't know if I would consider that game to have good components if we're counting the storage solution as well.
To me, I think it is part of the experience, especially, like how much I'm going to weight it towards the experience. It's going to take a really bad box or a really good box for me to talk about that in a review, because time needs to be spent on other things, especially when we have as concise reviews as we tend to have. Like if we were doing 20-30 minute reviews where we were much more comprehensive, and there are amazing channels that do that incredibly successfully, then I think it would be worth talking about that in virtually everything. But as it is right now, it's just not going to matter to me that much unless it does in one way or another. But I think the bottom line is, like, I like to see the production values extend to all aspects of the game. And when a rule book is really well done, it's really important to me. When a rule book is a big, giant, floppy mess that takes up an immense amount of room at the table, then it is annoying and I hate it, and it lessens the experience of the game.
Imperium Horizons. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, exactly. So, you've done a decent amount of design work at this point. You've considered the aspect of making games, and you've also done a lot of research on making games. How much do you think about, like, either as you're working on something or you're considering other games that you're playing, how much the, like, limitation of production weighs into game creation?
In my opinion, at least when I am starting out a design, I do not consider it whatsoever. Like, I at that point, there's so much fluidity in everything that I'm doing that there's no reason to even consider, I don't know if I can make this component work. That'll be something I solve later. I've never gotten to a point where I even have gotten to this. I have never gotten to the stage where I need to actually start considering that, I think.
Right.
I think when I look at other games and, like, start considering, there are definitely times when I start wondering, I wonder why they made the decision to make that component that way. I'm trying to think of an example here.
Well, while you're thinking about it, what kind of functionality, when it comes to components, like how gimmicky can components get, and you to still, like, enjoy them and get thrills out of them? Because, like, I know you love Treasure Island. You showed me Treasure Island, and you were like, check this out, and I was like, whoa, this is buck wild. I don't know who signed off on this, but I'm here for it.
I think that if I am full send on gimmicky components, if they bring something to the game.
Right.
Like, there are a ton of components that there's no reason for them to exist. Like that weird gun in the game that we played. I forget the name of that game at this point.
Infiltrators
that has a gun for you to point and guess what card your partner.
Not at another player, but point at the table. Yeah.
You point at the card, and the whole reason the gun exists is for you to say, okay, I'm making an official guess.
And it has a stand. It's not just a gun. It has a stand.
I forgot about the stand. It has a stand that is just wildly unnecessary. But then at the same time, I guess on the complete reverse side, functionally, we don't need the bridges in White Castle.
Yeah.
Like functionally, that could just be like bridges painted on the board that you set the dice on, like with specific slots. But they bring so much to it just elevates the game to the point that the theme feels so much stronger, when I think the theme could easily have been weaker without those.
Yeah, I think they provide an elegant amount of like verticality to the game. Like it makes it pop almost like a picture book, which I think works really well with the art style. And there is a degree of like cognitive intuition that it provides in the step downs, because the dice that are in the middle of the bridge are inaccessible, whereas the dice on the outside are acceptable. So I actually do think about like the dice sliding over and getting onto the pedestal that's the accessible sides of it. And so I think it does provide something, even if it's ultimately unnecessary. Like it's an aid that, sure, could they have gotten around it? Maybe, but at least in White Castle, that game is not expensive, and they have some really beautiful production in there, and you don't have to assemble or disassemble the bridges, so they're super easy to set up.
You do once. You have to assemble them once. I had a tough time because I'm bad at following instructions.
That's true. You have to go through the the Cardboardian IKEA assembly of these bridges.
See, and I love IKEA. IKEA is a thing that I love building my little puzzle piece furnitures. I don't know what it was. I could not. It took me like 30 minutes to assemble the bridges in White Castle. It took me much longer than it had any right to. I still love them. I do think they're a really solid board game component, but I was just saying that as kind of a counterexample of the gun, stand, and infiltrator. We mentioned Treasure Island. I think those components are really great for what they are, because to me, a lot of the tension in the game is you can only circle within the circle that you're given. Like it's an actual physical piece that you are drawing on the map.
Right.
And it leaves a lot of like little places where you're like, oh, I don't know if he hid the treasure like 3 board game inches higher, then I missed it completely. I think that the fact that it is a really physical proof of where you have searched is drawing on the inside of that circle. I think those components are really great for that reason. Like they bring a lot to the game in terms of you're searching on a treasure map for a pirate's treasure. Like it brings so much of the theme to the game that that game can't exist without those components.
Right.
I
think, like an important part of this, because I mentioned earlier the visuals and what brings me in, is also recognizing like your own boundaries and where components can also be like a degree of gatekeeping, I guess. I mean, or at least you're limiting your audience. I'm thinking about something like Cthulhu Wars, which Peterson Games has its own whole like hellscape as far as delivering on their Kickstarters and other things going on. But
we're not talking about that. Kickstarter will be another. Kickstarter will be a different podcast.
Yeah. But Cthulhu Wars is a game where the components are so over the top and so opulent that, like the coffee mug that I drink from isn't even as big as some of the miniatures that are in that game. And we have a friend, John, who has the entirety of everything. Cthulhu Wars. He has everything. It is so much money for something that functionally could just be smaller, more modestly made, still beautiful miniatures. And I think that this is a case where I'm not going to disparage people who want that. Play with your toys, make your investments, do what you want. But I do wonder if like there's a degree of like maybe a more modestly made game would have resulted in some more sales and maybe more stability for the company, and they wouldn't be in as many financial woes as they are right now. Or maybe one of the driving points that actually made it get the sales is those gigantic miniatures. Mm-hmm. But those are similar decisions that I imagine publishers have to think about when they're considering, what level of opulence they want to provide. Personally, when a component crosses this obscene boundary, I can feel it more instinctively than describe it. That's the famous, description of what something obscene is by the Supreme Court. Like, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Which isn't a very good definition, but, like, components can definitely cross over into a territory where I go, like, ugh, that just isn't worth it. Like, I can buy 5 games for that amount, and, like, especially if the game isn't one of the best games I have ever played.
We should bring your copy of Cthulhu Wars to PAX next year. And then go buy Meeple Source and just buy Meeples and play Cthulhu Wars with just Meeples to piss off all the Cthulhu War fans.
Okay. First off, that's John's copy. Second off,
don't you?
Oh, I own Cthulhu Wars Duel, which has the cardboard standees instead of the Meeples, which I think standees are great. As full art standees, especially compared to just completely unpainted minis, I'm all for it. Acrylic standees, even better. But when it comes to that, it's funny because early on in our gaming, John and I were both really big fans of Cyclades, the Bruno Catala game. Really great game, just got a new version. But I was much more the Euro gamer, and there was an optional component upgrade that you could buy to change the minis of the game into little wooden meeples. And I bought that. And boy, did John go like, oh, God, this guy. In retrospect, I'm also like, why did I do that? I should have just been fine. I didn't need to pay extra to have wooden bits so I could feel like as a superior Euro gamer or something. But, nonetheless, that is there. Upgrades. Have you component upgraded any of your games? If so, what?
I don't think so.
I can tell you right now, I have lots.
I don't think so, unless you count. I have sleeves for Ascension, but that's it. And those on. That's the only thing that I can even think of. I mean, I have a Meeple first player token for Wingspan, but nothing else. I don't really. Yeah, there aren't many times where I'm like, man, if only this component was better, I will spend $20. I will say I did at some point when Board Game Geek restocked the Terraforming Mars dual layer player board. I did consider that, but that was a step too far for me.
Yeah, I mean, it adds functionality for sure.
It does.
But I've always dived hard into my hobbies, and one of the aspects of that has always tried to be creative in how I address my hobbies. And in some ways, that's going to be like creating new custom components for something. I've done this for ages, and some people express this same sentiment through like making variants for games, making solo modes or making variant characters or factions, that kind of stuff. But I've always loved 3D printing stuff, carving stuff. I love making like little FAQ index cards and stick those with illustrations and illuminations into the boxes. And also purchasing upgrades. And to a degree, I recognize how that is wasteful. But if it's a game that I'm going to get to the table, if it's one of my favorite games, then yeah, we will consider it. An example is Wingspan. We have the wooden food components on that to give it a little bit of a pop. For a game like, let's see, Arcs. Well, Arcs, I love the component upgrades on those. The washed ships are really cool, but I do love the stock wood components in that as well. So that was a hard call. But the Terraforming Mars, the Ares expedition, we have the upgraded metal cubes because I love them. I love them. Nice. Yeah,
I'd consider that too.
And
I haven't, but I would consider that.
It gives a nice weight to things, a tactile nature, and also stops them from like sliding around as much. But like I shouldn't have to. That's one of those things. Like I don't want, just like I don't want to buy an expansion that solves a problem with a game. Like I don't want to take a bad game and try to bolt on an expansion to fix it. I don't want to buy components that solve problems of the original production. At that point, that was a failure on the part of the game. It would have to be an extremely good game that I love everything else about, that it's like, oh, well, this elevates it a little bit more. But I tend to look down on retroactive post-purchase availability of something to solve a component problem.
Yeah, and I think that's what... That and just the fact that it does indeed cost money is kind of what kept me from doing the Terraforming Mars player boards. But that is something that I would consider, because we do play that game a fair amount. My wife really loves that game. So I could see myself, like, we would get use out of having a dual layered player board on that.
Have you ever bought a game purely based off of the components? Like you saw something in it and you were like, oh man, I have to check that out.
I think no. I typically, I'm racking my brain. I have another whole bunch of board games in my bedroom that probably would be another just thing for me to look at. But no, I mean, I don't think I've ever looked at a board game and been like, just based off of components, I'm buying this because this component looks cool. I'll figure out if I'm going to like the game or not later, but just how cool it looks is worth it. I think I usually go mechanics and feel first. I typically also don't buy games that I haven't played before. Right.
Yeah, which is smart and something that I recommend to everyone that I can. Since getting into covering board games, my habits are slightly different in that I'm looking for content, right? I want to look for things that are interesting, eye-catching, that are unconventional, that are a little bit different, that make me want to talk about something in a different way. And so, like sometimes I will just buy a game either, because it looks cool or because, the designer gave me some pitch about the game, without actually having played it or known about it or any of that kind of stuff. I'll get it to the table. A great example of a game where I lusted for it and immediately went out to play it, at least, based off of the components, was the first time that I saw Ethnos. I was at Dice Tower in 2017, and I saw so many people playing this game, and it had just come out, and I was like, what is this game? I loved something that people apparently didn't like about the game, or a lot of people didn't like, but I loved that it had this very almost like drab matte board, but these like technicolor plastic stacking pieces on top of it gave it such a presence and a look and an aesthetic. And the fact that you stack the pieces and they become towers, I didn't know, is this like an area control game or what is this? And I saw enough people playing that I was like, I don't know what this game is, but I need to get to a table that has it available. And I had squeezed myself into a game, and then immediately, as soon as I played it, I went off and bought it. But like License to Krill, we mentioned this earlier. I like I was reached out based off of the kelp review of all things. Someone was like, "Oh, you like stuffed animals? I saw your little skit at the beginning. How do you feel about whales that are also board game boxes?" And I was like, "I'm not sure. It doesn't really
He
sound
has
like
a
the type
little
of."
suit and tie.
I know, right?
Oh.
And they were like, "Well, like it probably is more like a family style game, but I would love to send you a copy anyway." And I was like, "Okay, great. Yeah, I'll check it out." And I played it, and it's totally a fine game for the context of something, like it's more strategic than Uno. It's more, strategic than a lot of mass market games. It is the only reason why it would stay in my collection is because of the endearing whale gimmick to the whole thing, and that component does elevate it. It's not a bad game. It's just not a game that I would otherwise want to keep. My son does really like it, and so it's probably something that he'll want to keep, especially because a lot of his friends didn't grow up with hobby board games, and so anytime he's tried to be like, "Oh yeah, I'll teach you how to play Ticket to Ride," and his friends are like, "This is the most complicated thing I've ever heard of," and he's like, "This is for babies." But his friends come over.
I'm out here playing Arcs.
Yeah,
You gotta learn Ticket to Ride.
Oh man, he had the biggest win in he taught his friends how to play Skull, and
rad.
They were dying, and he is so excited because he's about to turn 10. He's about to have a bunch of boys spend the night, and he is going to play Skull with all of them, and probably like Fortnite and Call of Duty and some other crap. But
are they going to bet candy, do you think?
Yeah, I hope so. Little gamblers. That'd be so cool. 2 of his friends' parents are cops, so, we got to be a little careful here. Got to be a little careful. So the Cardboard
It'd be
Herald
really
doesn't...
good if you didn't form an underground candy smuggling ring.
that would be
based on
ideal.
That information, it's probably good for you to not do that.
Yeah, they're Juno cops, so they're probably okay with the candy issue.
They're probably chill.
Yeah, they're chill.
For the audio listeners, I do want to point out something I just noticed about the whale. That it has kawaii eyes.
Oh yes, yes,
like
very much.
Eyes.
It is like right now melting your heart. It is 3 dots of reflection in its eyes, along with its shirt and tie. Very fascinating production.
I think that it's super reasonable to purchase a board game based on how strong the components are. I just don't think that I purchase things component first. I will purchase a thing if I enjoy the game and the components swing me. Like if I was like on the fence and the components are super solid, I'll go out of my way to get that game then. Like I think that there are a lot of games where the components being great elevate the experience, but it has to be a solid game already. But I guess you're probably in a similar way, especially because you and I think both, other than games that we're going to be doing reviews on, we typically are playing games before I think we buy them, for the most part. Not always, but
what about components? Are there any games where the components were such a turnoff to you because they were not of good enough quality? Not aesthetically, they weren't your preference, but you were actually like, ugh, this just doesn't feel good.
I'll say Stardew Valley, the board game. The components are just feel so lifeless. Like everything in that game is a cardboard cube, or not even like cube, like a cardboard tile square.
It's got a kind of like obnoxious tray of cardboard squares.
The components of that game are on top of the gameplay itself being like fine at best. The components do it no justice. Like the components are just so anti the cute theme of Stardew Valley. Right. That's a game that I have jotted down as like one of the worst sets of components.
I think a game that I find cursed at this point is Castles of Burgundy, because I love Castles of Burgundy as a design. It is a brilliant design. Fantastic two-player game. It is one of the games that, like, dice can be used in such a strategic and tactical way that, you know, even people who are like, I hate games with dice, the dice are wonderful in it. But every production of Castles of Burgundy has felt like it has been made a worse game because of the components. And I don't know why it keeps on happening. Now, there is the beautiful, like, super deluxe version, but that, again, is, to me, the, like, ultimate in opulence that the game gets in the way of itself. You know, Castles of Burgundy should be a light, airy, we're going to sit down and play 45 minutes to maybe an hour and a half if we have a full 4 players game that's easy to get to the table. That's one of its selling points is, you know, it's accessible, it's poppy, it's easy, but it still feels so strategic and smart. And having this intense big production detracts from that ease of the game and kind of makes it a little bit worse of a game. The original version, the tiles were like barely thicker than paper, and were incredibly beige and hard to distinguish what the different types of tiles were. And then the version that Ravensburger came out with a few years ago, which we reviewed on this channel, does have a pretty ugly, like, green and red aesthetic to everything. That it's not just the visual, like the art style doesn't mesh with me, but it feels hard to distinguish elements of the board. Like it's something that detracts from the usability of the game. And it's like, come on, man, this is Stefan Feld's best game. There should be a very good production of this that is just elegant and nice and mirrors the breeziness of the game itself, and it just has not happened yet.
Yeah.
Castles of Tuscany does a far better job than Castles of Burgundy, even
Shots
if
fired.
It's not as good of a game.
Shots fired.
Yeah.
We have one viewer question that I think we should get to sooner rather than later.
Yes, yeah.
This
Before
is from,
I just talk about all of Stefan
we can
Feld's
talk
games.
about Castles of Burgundy will be the next podcast theme.
You got me worked up. You got me worked up, Eric. All right.
I said nothing the entire time. Don't put you getting worked up on me. I did not. You're
hosting this podcast now. Anything that I feel during this podcast is a direct fault of yours.
You're in your own head about this, my guy. I did not bring up Castles of Burgundy.
Cursed. All right. Lay this listener question on me.
The listener question is from Blue Sec Pearl, I think is probably how it's pronounced, Seqperl. And the question is, what themes or concepts would you like board games to explore in new ways? And I got an answer. We need more board games about merchants in Renaissance Europe.
Yeah, Mediterranean trading is,
so few games about that, and I just think that we need more.
Yeah, Castles of Burgundy. Someone should make Castles of Burgundy. No, I've thought about this. This is something that's maybe unique to me, but I think immigration would be a fascinating thing to take on as a board game theme, either in a modern context, like infrastructure, governmental infrastructure, immigration and emigration from like a geopolitical system. You could deal with things that are more sensitive topics like diasporas and refugees and, like the forced immigration of certain populations. You could deal with some really weighty topics with that. You could also just, look at real bureaucratic aspects of immigration. And then you could also look at like historic immigration. Like I think like an anthropologic view of immigration on a large-scale timeline would be an interesting way to do like some sort of Civ development game. Instead of Civ development, you're kind of like making culture development. That as well has some really sensitive topics, but every Civ game pretty much ends up kind of touching on some aspect of colonialism. That, like, there's ways to do it. There's ways to do it, and you could also do it in like a fantasy world with fantasy races. You could make them cute forest critters until people are like, oh wait, this is an allegory for us, isn't it? Yeah. The reason why this comes to mind is because I was raised by an immigration officer. I was born overseas. We were in the Philippines because my dad worked for immigration from like the embassies in Eastern Europe. And so we lived in the Philippines. We lived in New Delhi, India for a while. We traveled to Thailand a bunch. We did all kinds of stuff. Moved over to the U.S. And in the U.S., I learned about immigration through that being my dad's career. Like, took part in a lot of immigrant community celebrations that we go to on the weekends. Made relationships and friendships with people of different cultures and communities. And I think it's an essential part to the like human experience is the blending of cultures. And there are lots of fascinating, sometimes dire, and also sometimes like really altruistic and optimistic aspects to immigration that could be really explored. That I want to see it. So there's my theme. Immigration. I'm off my soapbox. What do you think, Eric? What's your theme? Or do you have any thoughts on immigration?
Just to comment on immigration, I think that's really interesting. Me here as the Washington D.C. correspondent for the Cardboard Herald podcast, it's time for Eric to talk about immigration. I think that it's definitely a theme that I haven't seen really mentioned other than briefly in board games, where it's like just a thing that kind of happens to you during a civilization game, or it is like you are colonizing these people, and
what's buck wild? To provide some context to this, now I'm just waxing poetic and thinking about my dad, my childhood and stuff. My dad would almost always come in and do a presentation at a classroom about what is immigration? As soon as a teacher was like, oh, your dad works for immigration? Great. So we'll do a topic on this. And so I got to hear him like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade repeatedly talk to kids and be like, you know what immigration is? How many of you have seen An American Tail? And how many of you have seen Men in Black? That was his touchstones for immigration for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders was Fievel of American Tail and the Russian Jewish mice immigrants into the United States looking for a better land. And then also the policing of immigrant aliens from outer space who are coming to our world, and hopefully you're managing that to make sure that it's a welcoming and uplifting community, but also keeping out the giant cockroach monsters. I
just think the giant cockroach monsters did nothing wrong.
They just wanted more sugar.
I'll stand on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I can't think of a board game that I feel like really does that theme and concept justice. The one
that Jack, I was not prepared for this intense of immigration discussion.
I should have gone first, I think. Mine's sports.
I love it. No, sports definitely should have more presence.
Sports, I just feel like I haven't ever seen a sports board game that gets it right, and it's probably because it's so tough to make the mathematic concepts behind sports work in a board game. And there's like management games that do it reasonably well, like Basketball I think is a pretty fun you're managing a basketball team game, but there isn't a game where it's like, I'm saying this with I have not played. There's a game called Baseball Highlights 2049 that I've been interested in that I have not ever been able to get my hands on. that simulates like the last inning of a Android baseball league.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's the gist behind it. But like there are so few games where it's like there's no game that I think really properly emulates a baseball game or a football game or hockey in a way that makes me feel like, oh, this really nails this theme.
Probably the most successful is maybe within these circles. I gotta imagine is Blood Bowl, and not the Blood Bowl team manager, but the proper, has been running for 30 years Blood Bowl playing, football with your Warhammer miniatures. Yeah. I had a friend who was way, way, way deep into Blood Bowl. Tried recruiting me several times, played a few times with him, but it was never something that really stuck with me. But people are passionate about their Blood Bowl.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I have not played Blood Bowl, so that's another one that I can't say that I know for sure. And maybe that's what I need to get into. Like maybe I need to do that.
There's undoubtedly a community there in DC.
We could put these two things together, where it's getting players from overseas and outside of America in to play our sport.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I mean, a lot of America's tolerance to immigrants may be based off of like celebrity culture. You just get a really good hitter in baseball, and then social justice follows.
It is amazing how much people can rally around baseball players that are like, oh yeah, this is
yeah.
Big Papi represents all of the Dominican Republic. That is the only fact I know about the Dominican Republic is Big Papi is from there, and therefore everything about the Dominican Republic is about that. Yeah. There are a number of baseball people that I've been at games with and been like, oh yeah, I know everything there is to know about this small nation, like small in the grand scheme of things, in terms of we are in Florida. It is a giant state.
Yeah.
You're in Alaska.
I think we need a challengers board game. So not a tennis board game where you're playing tennis, but a tennis board game where you're trying to navigate the romantic triangle between yourself and two best friend tennis players. How about that?
I would be Zendaya in this scenario. Yeah. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I kind of want to be one of the gay guys.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen the movie.
You're okay. Don't.
Okay. I heard it's good.
It's fine. I wanted better after Call Me by Your Name, but I think it's fine. The soundtrack's kind of in your face in a way that I didn't think was good. And,
okay.
Ooh, what is our film podcast going to be called?
Yeah, we need to have a film podcast. I'm a huge film fan. Eric is a big film fan, huge film fan. I only say big because I was going to follow that up with and has worked previously in the film industry and done like, actual film school stuff, whereas I'm entirely just, like a geek about it and wish that I had at one point, and then through cautionary tales, perhaps dodged a bullet by not being in the film industry. But yeah, we could talk movies all the time. We could talk about games about running movie theaters would be cool too. That would be a great theme.
Yeah, well, there are a couple that I need to try. There was one that like the very first conversation we had when I went to your house to buy Imperium Classics and Legends from you.
Yeah.
Where I mentioned that I was I just came from the film industry, and you're like, you got to play this game, and I had never heard of it before, and I still don't know what it is. Something or other.
I can't remember what it is. I imagine, based off of the time frame, I do recall an interview. This is horrible. I've interviewed so many people for the Cardboard Herald, but there was someone that was making a game about making movies, and I remember interviewing them, and they were some filmmaker who was turned board game designer. I know I interviewed them. I can't remember what that game is. I hope it was good.
I just want to point out, I did just Google the Silver Screen Herald, and that is free.
Oh, okay. Love it. All right. I think we're digressing to a certain point here.
We've entered an American tailspin.
Yes. Oh, man.
I felt good about that one. Thank you for joining me for this conversation, Jack. Thank you to the audience for listening to us talk about American Tail in Men in Black and how that relates to immigration and also sports games. If you have any listener questions that you want to start putting us down a random path to end the podcast on, please feel free to comment them on the YouTube video or on Spotify. You can comment on Spotify now.
Nice.
We will be checking that. Or feel free to email us at cardboardherald@gmail.com. You can find this podcast on all of the major platforms at this point. So feel free to find it on YouTube if you want the video aspect, or Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think anywhere you find podcasts, we should be on at this point for the most part.
We're there. In your face holes of all sorts.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. I have been Eric, along here with Jack, with the Cardboard Herald podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye.